Hello and welcome to the 5th edition of the AviaDev Insight Connectivity Update for 2025, the podcast offering a deep dive into the route developments to, from and within Africa. I'm your host, Jon Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We are a platform dedicated to supporting fleet and route developments to, from and within the region. As always, we've got a packed agenda, and this month a variety of routes and topics, a couple of deep dives as well. So to kick us off, please allow me to welcome back our in-house experts. We did get some quite positive feedback as I channeled my inner Donald Trump last month. So this month, the guys don't know this, I have channeled my inner Michael O'Leary for the introduction. Thought we'd go for aviation personality. So buckle up, here goes. Okay. Right, let's stop pretending this industry is all about pulling silly faces and cutting cakes and ribbons. Welcome to the May Connectivity Update, the podcast that says what the airlines execs won't. Today's episode, we've got two of the people who actually understand what's going on in African aviation. First, Shawn Mendis. He spotted the planes, run the airlines, and probably predicted your route before you've even filed it. While most airline CEOs are busy writing LinkedIn posts about bold new visions, Shawn's out here telling you which routes actually work and which ones are just pipe dreams. Then there's Behramjee Ghadially, aviation's unofficial watchdog, spreadsheet assassin. If an airline so much as sneezes, Behramjee's already dissected it, analysed the load factors, and written a post tearing it to shreds. Together, they're here to tell you what routes are worth a damn, which ones are doomed, and why most governments and airlines are still stuck in the 1990s when it comes to air connectivity. So if you're in this game to actually get things done, not just collect lanyards and nod in panel discussions, this is your boarding call. So welcome to the podcast. How was that, guys? Happy with that?
Good.
Very
What is
pleased.
the human radar, though?
The human radar? I don't know. You have to ask Michael.
Yeah, you could be a lion radar. Behramjee, you're a wildlife radar. Yeah, you can lion somewhere in the wild at 100 paces.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. That is why it says on your title here
Little
today,
pizza
Lion
place in
Tamer.
Bangkok.
Yes, that is true too. And we have a rather interesting image to go with this podcast as well, which the guys haven't seen, but I'll be putting that on social media later on as well. So go and check out the YouTube channel to watch it if you're not already. Right, so we're going to start today with an airline that we haven't covered that much actually over the duration of the connectivity update, and that is Air Côte d'Ivoire. The airline is in the news because it's shortly receiving the first of a couple of A330-900 neo aircraft from Airbus, and one destination mooted in the airline's plans which stood out alongside Paris, Geneva, Washington, London, etc. was Beirut, and it really caught the eye. So I think, Behramjee, you're going to start with this. Why Beirut? What are the numbers? Because it definitely took me by surprise. Was that the case for you?
So, firstly, good afternoon to everybody. With regards to Air Côte d'Ivoire, let's look at some of the history that led to where we are today. Air Senegal first placed the order for the A330-900 neo in 2016 or 2017 for 2 units. And Air Côte d'Ivoire by then was already established, but not well established. It was just a regional carrier. Now it's become a proper network carrier for West Africa and Central Africa. A few years later, I think just after COVID, Air Côte d'Ivoire made their own announcement that the government now wants to invest heavily into the carrier. They also ordered a couple of A330-900 neos, along with a couple of A321 neos, though that's not been officially cited, but a lot of media reports state that they've ordered A321 neos as well, and including one XLR, but there's nothing official that I've seen in the media about that. Obviously, the A330-900 neo plans was to start Paris. That was an automatic choice, whilst the second route destined for the aircraft was USA. But now, as we all know, starting a new route to the US is not as easy as starting a new route to Europe. You have to do FAA audits, US DOT audits, which take a year or two minimum. I've personally seen that happen at Air Senegal. So obviously, though they're getting two A330s at more or less the same time within a few weeks of each other, maybe a few months of each other this summer, they won't be able to launch Paris and USA side by side. So the CEO announced a month or two ago that the second A330 will be flying to Beirut, which caught everybody by surprise. Not that there's no market, but just the choice of Beirut as the second A330 destination. I don't know if many of our listeners know about this, but Abidjan, I believe, has the biggest population of expat Lebanese in sub-Saharan Africa. Around 300,000 Lebanese live there officially. I don't know what the unofficial numbers are. Having been to Abidjan 3 times, I can say that there's a massive community over there. There's one part of Beirut which is like a mini Lebanon, so to say. And I visited quite a few of the Lebanese travel agencies over there. So the market demand between Beirut and Abidjan in 2023 was 68,000 passengers, but that dropped by about 25% to 54,000 in 2024. Currently, the airline that connects Beirut with Abidjan conveniently is the Middle East Airlines. They fly 4 times a week using an A330-200 via Accra on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. But it's not a non-stop flight. It's a one-stop flight. Well, we don't know how many times they'll be flying to Beirut. We assume it will be 3 times a week, and they would be flying non-stop. Highly doubt they'll be doing a one-stop service via somewhere. So from a competition point of view, their onboard product will be far superior to MEA's, that's for sure. But one thing which I've noticed with the Lebanese community in Abidjan from the travel agents that I visited, they are very loyal to MEA. Very loyal. So Air Cote will have to do a lot of creative marketing. They'll have to offer obviously 2-piece baggage allowance free of cost, as well as some undercut MEA's fares initially to poach away that business. MEA currently has 61% market share on this route, followed by Emirates 13%, Turkish Airlines 9%, and Qatar Airways 8%. The good thing also for Air Cote versus these one-stop operators is that in order for Emirates to get you from Beirut to Abidjan, it's actually a 2-stop journey because it's Accra, Dubai, transit in Dubai, and then backtrack to Beirut. Same thing with Qatar Airways. It's Accra, Doha, Beirut. Turkish those non-stop. Turkish and AviaDev are non-stop to their hubs and then one-stop connection beyond. But surprisingly, AviaDev does not have that big a market share on the Beirut route. Probably because they're focused on other areas and they only fly a 320 Neo 3 or 4 times a week. 3 times a week using a 320 Neo. But overall, let's look at the market numbers for Beirut to Sub-Saharan Africa. Biggest market is Abidjan, no doubt, 54,000 last year, followed by Lagos, 33,000, then Kinshasa, 23,000, Accra, 16, Libreville, 15, Douala, 10, Conakry, 7. Conakry actually dropped from 12 to 7, 12K in 2023 and then dropped to 7K in 2024. Don't know why though, but that's a sizable drop. Then Lomé's 10K, Abuja 9K, Freetown 7, Dakar 7, Cotonou 8, Brazzaville 6, and Point Noir 5. Flying 3 times a week, these are the relevant markets that Air Cote would be connecting, hopefully in both directions. Because if they don't connect, at least I would say majority of these markets in both directions, that flight will not go even 60% full. So they need to ensure that their Beirut schedule connects majority of these sub-Saharan markets. Otherwise, it's going to be a very, very painful struggle for them. Their onboard product for Beirut on the A330-900 Neo is totally not suited for that market segment because it has 240 seats in a 4-class configuration, which is ultra premium, 4 first class, 28 business, 21 premium economy, and 187 economy. So definitely nobody's going to be flying or paying for first class tickets to Beirut because it's primarily a VFR market with very little business demand. The business class will also not be even half full. Premium economy, I would assume they will just be getting some last minute upgrades at the airport or paying a small incremental fee, but I don't see anybody from Beirut or Abidjan paying to fly premium economy to Beirut back and forth. The economy cabin of 187 seats should not be that hard to fill at least 60 to 70%, provided they have the connections on offer. But as we can see, 54,000 passengers a year, when you have already an established player in the market with Middle East Airlines, it's not going to be an easy road for them. The good thing with Cote was that the travel agent loyalty for them in Abidjan is very, very strong. They have a very good incentive scheme with the local travel agents over there. But the Lebanese travel agents are more loyal to their Middle East airlines. That will be an interesting thing to see how they manage to turn that around. But yeah, overall, with regards to Beirut to Africa, the market overall dropped from 878,000 passengers in 2023 to 770,000 in 2024, which is a 12% decline. One thing which is interesting to note is that the Abidjan-Paris flight time is more or less the same as Abidjan-Beirut, but the average fare is half for Beirut. Beirut is $404 one way with YQ. Paris is over $900 one way with YQ. So you can just tell by that how badly it's going to perform financially. Another thing which is in favor of Paris versus Beirut is that cargo in the belly. Paris-Abidjan flights are full with belly cargo both ways. Beirut does not, I don't think so there's any big Lebanese exports to sub-Saharan Africa compared to what France offers. That's also another weakness that Air Cote will have to deal with, because their belly cargo, I don't think so, will be full in both directions. So that will be a bit of a handicap for them also. But yeah, overall, I don't see this route doing too well for them. They need to get their act together and get the US permits done as soon as possible, because the plane was bought to fly to the US. And if they cannot get the US route done fast, then they should look at Montreal. Montreal is an interesting market for Abidjan. There are 30,000 passengers point to point, but also a very big market for Dakar, Bamako, Ouagadougou, Douala, and Yaoundé, Libreville, Kinshasa in particular. And nobody flies from sub-Saharan Africa into Montreal. Majority fly Air France or Royal Air Maroc. So Montreal, I would say, is a good opportunity for them to look into instead of New York, if there's certain pressures to meet timelines, etc. But definitely those routes, I would assume, would have a higher load factor than Beirut. So yeah, that's my detailed analysis on Air Cote d'Ivoire. By the end of the day, the main problem with Air Cote d'Ivoire will be that silly cabin configuration. That cabin configuration will hurt.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that cabin configuration will hurt every single route of that, even Paris. Thank you.
This is going to take me back to one thing which I've always said about Air Cote d'Ivoire, is that the way they conduct themselves, they seem to think that they're not actually an African airline, and that the realities of the African market do not apply to them. They seem to think that they live in their little Abidjan bubble, and quite probably that is where their management and their stakeholders all live, in this little Abidjan elitist bubble, and don't quite understand the dynamics of the market. We've both worked extensively with the Cote d'Ivoire market, and we've met with the agents, and Air Cote d'Ivoire has consistently positioned itself, or at least tried to position itself, as a premium brand while delivering a significantly sub-premium product. So I really don't understand why they continue to live under the delusion that people actually want to fly with them, rather than people are forced to fly with them simply because their protectionist policy by the government of Cote d'Ivoire is such that other airlines just often give up rather than actually try to get permits to fly into Cote d'Ivoire or pay the extortionate handling fees that are charged to operate at their airports. And so generally, yeah, I've got very little respect for Air Cote d'Ivoire. I think in general they are, they're one of the typical government boondoggles that just lap up taxpayer money. I think Air Cote d'Ivoire is particularly egregious in that respect, because for some reason they actually believe their own propaganda that they're doing well. I remember once a transport minister from Cote d'Ivoire, some political functionary, said that we projected to lose $120 million, and instead we lost only $108 million. So it's like we made a $12 million profit. And when you approach the whole thing with that kind of attitude, you're doomed to mediocrity. If you budget so much for failure, mediocrity begins to be seen in a positive light. And I think that's where Air Cote d'Ivoire has gone down a rabbit hole. But let's not talk about numbers in this respect. And I think you did a very good job covering numbers over there. But let's look at yields, because while there are a lot of people flying between Beirut and Abidjan, and Beirut and all of West Africa for the most part, there's about a dozen markets with around 10,000 passengers a year on them, and all of them are can be fed with smart scheduling into a proper hub bank but the yields on this are absolute garbage. I mean, the average sector fare on this is in the $200 to $250 range, and as you said, this is half of what they're getting for a route to Europe. And I think a big reason for this is that the economies both in Cote d'Ivoire and in Lebanon are pretty bad. I mean, certainly Cote d'Ivoire has been improving lately, but I think Cote d'Ivoire's also got, while I hesitate to say it, I'd say that there is definitely a lot of political questions in terms of how the next government in Cote d'Ivoire is going to form and whether there might be any public reactions to that. So I think there are definitely iffy situations on both ends of that route, which are not going to really help drive yields up. This is not high-powered, French executives from Total and places like that who have basically an unlimited budget to spend on their travel. This is going to be, the small business people. It's going to be the families, the VFR traffic and stuff like that, which is going to drive this route. And those people are extremely price sensitive. And you don't go with a 4-class product on a brand new aircraft if you expect to actually make money. Now, even the aircraft, and talking about the money for the aircraft, the reason these aircraft have been so badly delayed is that they didn't have the money to pay for them. They've had to go out there and secure new funding for the final delivery payments for these aircraft. And that is, we've heard that this plane is coming for the last year and a half. They're finally ready to come now because they've finally been able to get the loans to pay for the delivery on these aircraft. That also means they're going to need to have cash flow to support those lanes payback. And, at the risk of pissing off my friends at Airbus again, this is another example of Airbus selling planes to African airlines that really have no need for them and have really no way to afford them. And, that's a very unfortunate thing. That's my little bit of a rant on this. But in general, in terms of what they could do with the plane, this is probably the least bad option. I mean, certainly Paris is a no-brainer. I mean, Paris to Cote d'Ivoire demand is effectively infinite, so they will always be able to fill up the plane on that. Their other attempts at getting out of the little West African bubble have been to Johannesburg, which, I'd say, looking at both SAA and Air Cote d'Ivoire's performance on Abidjan has been woeful would be a polite way of putting it. Atrocious would be probably more accurate. But, either way, this is not an airline which has had a huge amount of experience operating outside of West Africa. Their attempts also to have code shares and interlines with Ethiopians stalled for many years. They now code share on Ethiopians' North American route. Well, at least they feed to Ethiopians' North American routes from Abidjan, which is now, I think, just JFK. I really have my doubts about Air Cote d'Ivoire's ability to go in with 2 long-haul aircraft off the bat with a need to generate cash flow to pay back loans on those immediately. I wouldn't want to be in their position today to have that kind of debt load. But, African airlines like nice shiny toys, and we can look at Uganda Airlines, RwandAir, Air Tanzania. I mean, all these guys have followed exactly this. Air Senegal have followed exactly this model. Let's go bring some brand new toys and then figure out what to do with them. And I think the Beirut route, as you pointed out, maybe a fallback for them. It is a more solid fallback than Air Tanzania's, for example, flying a 787 from Dar es Salaam to Zanzibar on 15-minute hops. But Beirut's a good market. Beirut could definitely use more competition to Africa, in terms of nonstop competition. So, that'll be a positive from a consumer standpoint. I don't think it is necessarily going to be a commercial success. And I think the main reason for that is the fact that this aircraft is in a configuration that makes absolutely no sense for an African carrier, but makes perfect sense for a carrier that is pretending to be European when it's actually based in Africa.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I learned something new. Oh, go on, Behramjee. You're going to finish us off on this one?
There's one point that Sean and I have not addressed, which is actually very, very critical, is how Air Cote d'Ivoire will technically manage the Rolls-Royce engine problem on the A330-900 Neos. Because that's been a big, big problem for everybody that's been operating that aircraft, including Air Senegal, which I've personally had experience with. As you know, Malaysian Airlines had to ground their first A330neo also recently when it came on board. So Air Côte better plan their maintenance facilities and their maintenance program for this aircraft properly, because otherwise it's going to be a very, very hard struggle for them.
Behramjee, you are assuming that they have looked further beyond the fact that shiny plane being delivered. Yay! I think that's pretty much what their entire focus is on right now. We have not seen them talk about, signing up for total care, signing up for any sort of support programs or anything else, which usually is, kind of press release that predates the delivery of these kind of aircraft. I know how African carriers work. I mean, I work with them on a regular basis. This is shiny toy, and that is the end rather than the means in reality. And unfortunately, that is a structural issue in many state-owned African carriers, where simply having a plane and launching a route is viewed as the success rather than the actual performance of the route or utility of that asset. And as long as that continues, African aviation, or at least this pocket of African aviation, is doomed to failure.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. Thank you for the deep dive. I learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners did as well. So YQ's the fuel surcharge, right, Behramjee, that's added. So when you talk about that,
YQ
just
or
for the
YR.
listeners. Okay.
But John, you didn't give us your opinion. You didn't give us your opinion on this.
Well, funny you should say that, Behramjee, because I did realise that at the beginning of this, I forgot to say that all the opinions of my guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of AviaDev. Therefore, I must politely decline to have an opinion on this one, Behramjee, because that is not my role, my friend. Thank you very much, though. Moving on. Okay, we're moving on. Right, so the second topic we're going to talk about is another... Friend to all, exactly. So we're going to talk about RwandAir, because there was a really interesting story off the back of the AFRA stakeholders convention they recently hosted. There was an article that came out saying that there's going to be a big focus on the airline looking at East Africa, specifically mentioning a couple of beach destinations, Mombasa, and the host destination of AviaDev as well, Zanzibar, being on the target list. So we've done a deep dive a couple of months ago into what's happening in Rwanda and the closure of the airspace and things like that. Is there a reason other than other markets are closed for this? Who wants to take this one first? Jon, do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. I think it's a logical progression. Rwanda is getting another Airbus 330. And, as they've said, that has been to strengthen long-haul route performance. Obviously, long-haul to and from Kigali as an O&D destination is limited. It's not a big country. It's not a big market. Even their tourism is aimed more at higher yield tourism than mass market. But they are going to have a lot of seats they're going to need to fill up. And considering the fact that Kigali can only support so much, they have to look in their backyard. And their backyard is going to be Kenya and Tanzania, which are seeing a huge boom in beach destinations, in particular, popularity from longer haul markets. And so the logical progression in that step is, we're bringing additional long-haul capacity. Where does it go? Well, let's look in terms of feeding more of it to the beaches. So it's a logical step. RwandAir has stopped being this delusional, just go out there to the dartboard and throw some darts and see where we go next. They've stopped being driven by political pressures. They've stopped being operated as a vanity project. They're actually trying to become more commercially focused. I'll say honestly, this has changed when Fouad took over as Chief Commercial Officer last year. So I think that has been a bit of a wake-up call for them. Certainly Qatar Airways is... personnel on secondment there, I'm sure, also bring a bit more professionalism to it. But you know what? They've got the assets now, and they're deploying them in a relatively sensible manner. Certainly, there's a big delta to close from being underwater to at least treading water, but they're kicking and screaming their way up to the surface, and I'll give them credit for that. That's the only way to go is up.
Yeah, Fouad and a couple of members of the team will be at AviaDev as well, and obviously that's in Zanzibar, so hopefully some of those meetings lead to some serious announcements and some new routes and all the rest of it. But Behramjee, have you got some numbers for us on these routes and some thoughts?
Thoughts, yes.
That was a rhetorical question. He's always got. Behramjee.
Numbers we discussed last time around, so I'm not going to go into numbers, just some thoughts. As Sean mentioned, this was a good pivot move by RwandAir because they have lost the high volume feed that is Brussels and to an extent London provided to Kinshasa and Brazzaville in particular, more so Kinshasa, because Kinshasa was a big feeder route for them from Paris and Brussels in particular. So it's such a big market, they've lost out on the volume and also on Paris to Brazzaville. Now, luckily for them, Zanzibar and Mombasa are also very high volume markets from Paris, London, and Brussels, but mainly during IATA winter season, not during IATA summer season to an extent. So during the winter season, I assume they should be able to get some good volumetric feed. Plus, also they will get some cheap one-stop traffic from Johannesburg via Kigali to Mombasa and Zanzibar, no doubt. The only downside to this is that they will be undercutting a lot of their one-stop competition fare-wise into Zanzibar and Mombasa. So the yields will not be that great for them. But at the end of the day, I don't think so. They're concerned about yields so much. They just want seats to be filled as much as possible for the time being. But yeah, it's a good pivot because losing Kinshasa and Brazzaville is not easy for them. So
yeah,
I hope
different
they
market
get some
for sure. Thank you.
Yes, and they also need to get in touch with a few big tour operators in UK and France to get some consistent business every week to go to Zanzibar and Mombasa. They can mix safari with beach. So those will actually guarantee a good flow with steady flow passengers like Thomas Cook tour operator or whoever else, Flight Center, etc.
Yeah, and you could do a twin center, very high-end holiday with the gorillas in Rwanda, and then obviously the high-end resorts in Zanzibar, and use RwandAir to get you there. So who knows? We'll see. But yeah, very interesting, and obviously we'll ask Fuad in person about what the plan.
One thing you mentioned about gorilla tourism. I just want to say one thing about how expensive gorilla tourism is for those who don't know. My cousin went to Kigali a couple of years ago, just after COVID. She was quoted $800 for a gorilla experience in the park, interacting, etc. And that is not cheap. That is much more than going to Kruger Park or Masai Mara or Serengeti. So those people who go for gorilla tourism activities in Rwanda are very, very, very rich.
Behramjee, is this wildlife fixation run in the family? I mean, it seems that safari expedition seems to be the family holiday of choice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
no, she didn't go for a holiday.
Absolutely.
She was in Rwanda for an artist conference. There was some art exhibition there where she was invited to present. And then she was offered a side trip for gorilla trekking or whatever it was. And she didn't go, naturally, because
but didn't go for $800
for 1 day. Yeah. Psychologically, that is really a bit too much.
No, John got a freebie, didn't you, John?
Hey, wait. No, I did not. Absolutely not. So I have been lucky enough to go twice. One was on an airline fan trip, but all of the fees were paid. And also in Rwanda, where we did a company trip after an event. So the one thing I would say as a global ambassador for gorilla conservation, Behramjee, putting that hat on, is that the permit fees are high, but the money that they raise is actually invested into the local communities to stop them going into the park to poach. So they give them cash, they give them support. So the money is used well, and you will know this very well. Obviously, it's a capacity issue that you can only visit one family of gorillas once a day for 1 hour. So you can only then, when you think of how many gorillas there are in the whole world, there's only about 1,100 mountain gorillas. They live in families, and some are in Uganda, some are in Rwanda, some are DRC. So the actual supply is so limited that it's such a special experience. It obviously attracts a high fee. So I think they're doing the best they can do, but it also provides a real cap on that as tourism. So if it's quite frustrating when you say to somebody in the UK, hey, do you want to go and see the gorillas? And then they realize there's only 50 places a day or whatever it may be. And that's what drives the price up too. So, and it's a long way. I mean, you can go by helicopter to the volcanoes, or you can drive, which is what we did, but it's 5 or 6 hours drive. Then you hike up the side of a volcano. You don't know whether you're going to find them, where they're going to be. It's an amazing experience, but not for the faint-hearted. So anyway, that's our gorilla interlude complete. Let's get back to aeroplanes. So I'm going to stick with you, Behramjee, for the next one, because this one is back in West Africa, and it's Delta's upgrade of the Atlanta-Lagos route to an A350-900. and they're going daily on this. So when does it start and how much capacity are they adding?
So Delta just announced a week ago, due to commercial considerations, which is totally warranted, that from the onset of the IATA winter season, they'll be upgrading their Atlanta Lagos from a 330-200 to an A350-900, which means an extra 36% capacity of seats on the route. This is mainly because of the growing demand for Nigeria from US and Canada. And also during the winter season, people have to understand that the average Nigerian passenger flies with 3 suitcases from USA to Nigeria. So in order to avoid payload issues, baggage being left behind in either US or Nigeria, Delta has made the smart commercial move by upgrading the flight to 350-900, which can carry all the bags, carry a good chunk of belly commercial cargo, as well as all the passengers that are required to be flown back and forth. Some may say, why didn't they do the bigger aircraft from JFK rather than Atlanta? It's very simple. Atlanta has a two-prone approach. The point-to-point market is 40,000 passengers, and the fare is quite decent, also $920 one way with YQ. But the main importance of Atlanta is connecting the whole of North America and Canada, USA and Canada, via Atlanta in both directions, the mega hub of Deltas. Hence why their loads from Atlanta are quite good, yield-wise as well. So definitely it was commercially warranted and it should do fine. Plus also it's an aggressive move against United, who are also increasing their own capacity into Lagos this winter season. So overall, this will do perfectly well. Fine for Delta, no doubt. Short and simple.
Yep, absolutely. Sean,
I'm
anything to
going
add?
to address something. Yeah, what Behramjee said, it's not directly linked to this. Certainly, he's explained the reasons why, but I'm going to actually point something out that came out from discussions I had with Delta some years ago on this in terms of their two-prong approach to the Nigerian market. And while they serve both Atlanta to Lagos and JFK to Lagos, those might as well be two completely different routes. Their JFK market is effectively a VFR market, which is catering to the West African diaspora in the northeast, so to speak, while their Atlanta route is more of the feeder route that takes the business traffic captured from all over the United States. And if you literally look at the yields on these two routes, their Atlanta yields, passengers flying via Atlanta into Lagos, are about 20% higher than the yields of passengers flying from the same destinations via JFK into Lagos. And I think that really shows how Delta has segmented their traffic flows to Nigeria. They're really treating Atlanta as the business-focused route with a U.S. point of sale and U.S. corporate contracts and so forth, while their JFK route is largely focused more on Nigeria point of sale, which was why it didn't operate for so long when they had problems with repatriating currency and so forth. But now the JFK route is going to be focused in terms of volume from the Nigerian point of sale, and that's why they need to go up to a larger aircraft to be able to, to push this through. So I think it's just an interesting chat that I had with them like about 6 years ago on this, and the numbers continue to bear that out. That Atlanta continues to carry 20% higher yield than JFK does. For what you think is the same set of passengers, but in reality is a very segmented differentiation of who travels on which plane.
Yeah, and they're going from a 330-200 to a 350-900. There's a better product, or would you say not necessarily?
To be fair, other than Delta's old 767s, I think that the Delta One product is pretty good across the fleet. I'm not going to say that it's a better product or a worse product. I think Delta's tried to invest significantly in standardizing the product. It's just their older planes, which are no longer serving most of the African markets, that are the laggards in that respect. But the 330neo and the 350 have essentially equivalent products in that respect.
Right, we're rocketing through. We've still got a few and a big deep dive to come at the end, so stay tuned for that, because we're going to talk about Dubai Africa market as well. But the next one, again, I think is pretty straightforward, which was the announcement that Air France is again increasing services down to South Africa and specifically Cape Town for the peak season. They're going to go daily with the A350, so that's quite a big increase in frequency. But they've said, I think, 15th of December till 12th of January, so it really is for that peak Christmas period. Is that just a straightforward response to the demand they saw last winter and obviously are predicting and what they're seeing for this winter, Behramjee?
Yes and no. There are two things I believe is responsible for this Air France KLM increase. Firstly, it is due to the softening of transatlantic demand to USA to and from Europe, especially during the low season time. Though we don't have the actual stats, both these airlines in their last quarterly performance presentation did mention that they've been seeing a 10 to 15% drop in US bookings ever since the new administration in America came into power. So this is basically Air France KLM reallocating resources to more guaranteed forms of business during the transatlantic winter season. Now KLM is increasing from 10 to 11 times a week. Air France is increasing to 5 times, but going daily during the ultra peak period. But also it's worth noting that Amsterdam to Cape Town is the largest point-to-point market outside of London for Cape Town. Last year, Amsterdam to Cape Town was 142,000 passengers, whereas Cape Town to Paris was less than half of that, 60,000 passengers point to point. The yields were more or less the same, about $700 one way. But due to the Dutch colonial history with the Cape Town province, they have much more higher demand, plus also a lot of rich Dutch people have their winter homes in Cape Town. So it's a very popular place for the Dutch to go to. The reason why it's 11 times a week also is because KLM gets a lot of feeder traffic from North America, UK, and Western Europe into Cape Town. So it's a two-pronged approach. Same thing for Air France. Air France, though, does not get a lot of USA traffic because of their flight schedule. They get more European traffic. But KLM gets a good chunk of USA, UK, and European feeding their Amsterdam flight into Cape Town. More so those tier 2 cities in the UK fed by their KLM City Hopper, KLM UK franchise, whatever that is. So yeah, this route will do fine for them. And it's only during the ITA winter season, not year round.
Yeah, it's a good point because I live down in the southwest of England and my local airport, Exeter, is connected now daily to Amsterdam. So actually that could be handy.
It did used to be
but
in
not for a long
days.
time. Not since I lived down here,
Sure.
Sean. Your thoughts on this, or is Behramjee kind of covered most of it?
No, I think one thing which we need to look at, because I think this is the real reality, is that we're increasingly seeing that in a market where transatlantic demand may be softening, as we say, we haven't seen the actual figures on that, but we've anecdotally heard that is the case. Markets like Cape Town in winter, markets like Africa in winter are actually going to become demand drivers because, it's not about the O&D. You're not just looking at the passenger flying from Amsterdam or Paris into Cape Town. It's going to be the passenger connecting beyond the gateway. And while an American may not want to go to Europe or vice versa, a South African will happily go to America, whether they're going to escape a genocide or otherwise, I shall not comment upon. But, South Africans will go to the United States and Americans will go to South Africa. And, other Europeans will go to South Africa and so forth. So this is actually a network demand driver rather than just simply looking at capturing the market or a higher market share. So I think it's interesting because I do believe that this additional capacity in particular, which has been added for this winter and 6 months out for Cape Town, is actually pretty close in because a lot of people book these close to 10, 11 months out even. But adding it over there is actually an attempt to stimulate the market and to try and redirect traffic that may be softening on transatlantic instead to fly to, South Africa rather than just skip a holiday or, not fly or whatever else. So, yeah, I think it's something we should keep an eye on because if we see more and more airlines doing something like this, I think that's just an interesting dynamic change and also would be an interesting positioning of Africa because Africa has never really been viewed by the big European airline groups as a demand driver. It has been, this is existing demand, which we're going to go and capture our share of. But using Africa as a means to stimulate network demand is just if that is what is happening, that is just an interesting paradigm shift for Africa and shows how the African market is maturing.
Yeah, a couple of really interesting things on that. One is how Cape Town is growing the frequencies with existing carriers. And of course, we talk about this all the time about route development is multiple things. And one of them is develop that demand. So Norse is going up in terms of its frequencies, a few others as well for the winter season. And the second one, which I've sort of raised already internally, which we don't have the numbers for, and you've both spoken about, is what is going to happen to the US market. And that's not just the Africa to US market, but the impact that if there is a drop in demand from Europe to the US, then there could be potential capacity that can be deployed into Africa, but not, as Sean said, just simply as, oh, let's put it there, but actually could really stimulate those markets and be a really good thing for African tourism, especially in the Northern Hemisphere winter time. So I think, there's some really interesting dynamics at play, and this could actually work in Africa's favor, but we'll wait and see what the numbers say. Okay, let's quickly touch on AirAsia, because AirAsia, of course, has been a big conversation on this podcast. There were rumors they were going to start Nairobi. They started Nairobi, and now they are discontinuing from the 1st of September. So the big question here is, what is happening to Sean's $20? That's the question. What are you going to do with it, Sean?
$20 continues to be committed to the AviaDev outreach program, and I will ask AirAsia if they want to be magnanimous to match my $20 to offset it, and then we can all profit together with the Karume Institute of Science and Technology, who's going to be the recipient of this year's AviaDev outreach program in Zanzibar in a couple of weeks' time. But yeah, I hate to say it, but I told you so. I think that sums it up. Yeah.
And you, Behramjee, no surprise. I think you were quite skeptical as well at the time.
Not skeptical. Sean and I knew this would happen. We had guaranteed that this would happen, but we thought it would happen sooner rather than later. The route has lasted 10 months. Our initial forecast, if you recall, when we discussed this last year, was that it should not last beyond May 2025, and it's lasting till September.
My forecast was it wouldn't launch to begin with, so let's put that out there.
But that is your usual pessimistic approach.
It's not too pessimistic. Let's look at this a bit more deeply in terms of AirAsia. And what I think is actually probably a significant reason why they're pulling the plug now is that the person who was driving this route on AirAsia's side was Paul Carroll. And he was the chief commercial officer, and he was driving it. And he has recently exited AirAsia to go to Jazeera in Kuwait.
Joined Jazeera.
And I think the internal champion for this route at AirAsia obviously exited the organization, and consequently, the numbers just jumped out as, hang on, this may have been Paul's route, but we're not quite sure that this is something we want to keep doing now that he's gone. And I think that probably is the reason why it stayed so long and why they've decided to pull the plug now in particular. So yeah, I think that is the unfortunate reality of this. It is a great potential route, but it's a potential route as in potential for the future and not potential for today. And AirAsia has talked multiple times about getting a partner to distribute African feed beyond whatever African gateway they go into. If they're able to get that done, I think we will have a very different ball game than just flying with Nairobi OND, because, no matter what they did a very good job. They did a better job than I expected they would in terms of stimulating that traffic from Kenya to Kuala Lumpur and to generally Southeast Asia. But there is a limited size of market that you could do. You can stimulate a market 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, even 100%. But they needed 700 to 800% stimulation for that route to make sense. And there is nowhere in the world that you can get that done operating an Airbus 330-300. That is just way too much capacity and way too much delta between break-even and actual market realities for this ever to have been successful. So I told you so, but I think we've learned good things from the experiment in terms of how African markets can react to that kind of long-haul stimulation. I think at the end of the year, when we actually see what their numbers were through the year in terms of yields, in terms of how much year-on-year market stimulation was and so forth, there'll be a lot of interesting lessons for other carriers to learn in the future.
Yeah, I actually think that's quite an optimistic view of this, because of course what you're saying is all that work that's gone into it isn't lost, because you've had some sort of presence in the market. So if you do go back in there and you do have a distribution partner, then people will go, oh yeah, I remember AirAsia, they used to fly. I know there's detrimental effects that they pulled out, but at least in that time, there was some sensitization to the market.
That's about the most optimistic way you could put it. This was an absolute disaster for them. There's very little silver lining for them. There is a silver lining for people like us who are being pundits on the outside and saying we can learn a lesson about what not to do from what they did. There is no silver lining for AirAsia on this. Truly, they have lost their shirt on this operation, and, internally, there hopefully will be a lesson that we can't do stupid things like this again.
All right, we've got one deep dive to go, but just before we do it, we're going to do a real quick final route announcement because we only saw this yesterday, which is a late entry with Air Tanzania announcing Johannesburg Zanzibar flight starting the week of AviaDev, so the 10th of June. A great way to get there from Johannesburg to Zanzibar. I'm not sure it's a great way to get back, though. It's only going to be Tuesday and Thursday to start, so let's see. So, Sean, go on. You're chomping at the bit.
Air Tanzania have announced flights from Johannesburg to Zanzibar. They have not announced flights from Zanzibar back to Johannesburg. I cannot for the life of me understand how Air Tanzania keeps doing this. What goes up must come down. This is a basic fundamental law of physics, of nature, of airline planning, of anything. But they've done this with Dubai. They're going to do it again with Zanzibar. You can fly nonstop, Johannesburg to Zanzibar. What a wonderful thing. How do I get back? Well, on some days of the week, you need to fly at 10:30 p.m., land in Dar es Salaam at 11, stay the night at the airport or pay your own hotel, and then fly out the next morning at 10 a.m. to get back to Johannesburg. Why would anyone in their right mind choose to do something like this? Why do they not just simply say, all right, I want to serve Zanzibar? And you know what? For an airline that's based in Tanzania, they have failed to exploit Zanzibar non-stop and holiday capability woefully. I mean, their only long-haul route from Zanzibar is to Gwangju. That also is just one way. Because this fixation of one-way flights is just asinine. I mean, forget everything else I've said about Air Tanzania. Please, somebody from Air Tanzania, you know how to contact me. You're going to be at AviaDev. Come and tell me why you're doing this, because I have racked my brains. I have pulled out hair. I have asked everybody I know in this industry, why could they be doing it? And everybody's just like, I don't know, they're at Tanzania. Please, come explain. Make sense of this for me. Make sense of this for your poor taxpayer.
Very good. G, anything you want to add on this route, or has that spoken for all of us?
If anyone at Air Tanzania would take the risk of explaining their logic to Sean, they should be pre-warned that the rebuttal from Sean will embarrass them and hurt their pride big time. So I advise you not to
But you know what?
discuss
I promise, if
Sean.
you're willing to explain it to me, I will be silent. I will not respond. I will simply say thank you for sharing. But please tell me, because I stay awake at night sometimes just thinking, how can anybody think that this is a smart thing to do? It drives me to tears.
Yeah, we can tell. It all comes from a place of love. We know that. Okay, right. We got sort of 8-9 minutes to go. Oh, the tears are coming for those. He might have had some hot sauce on his lunch, but there are tears rolling down Sean's face here. Okay, so with our last deep dive for this month, we've talked a lot about the Dubai Africa market, especially when we talked about Ethiopian and Etihad and all sorts of stuff when it comes to UAE wider, and obviously all the different gateways that ET are providing. But the guys wanted to do a bit more of a deep dive into that market, especially sort of comparing Ethiopian and Kenya Airways performance. So I think, Behramjee, you want to kick us off on this one?
Sure. I've done a lot of notes on this. So let's start with the Dubai Africa significance. Over the last decade or so, Dubai has replaced rapidly Guangzhou and Istanbul as the preferred destination for African traders in particular to do business with, as well as for labor migration, as well as for tourism. The main reason being the easy access of getting Dubai visas in the past, as well as the banking regulations over there. So as a result of which, many airlines from Africa have increased capacity, increased flights. Emirates has also increased African presence in Africa over the last decade or so. So much so that in the last year, the Dubai Africa total market demand was 4.9 million passengers versus 4.6 million the previous year. So 7% growth. The top sub-Saharan markets for Dubai to Africa were Addis Ababa 90,000, followed by Entebbe 256, Nairobi 170, Johannesburg 175, Dar es Salaam 124, Accra 103, Cape Town 80, Lagos 77, and Douala 69,000 each respectively. Keep in mind, before the visa ban was instituted upon Nigerians in 2017 or 18, the Lagos Dubai market was 250,000 passengers a year, whilst Abuja was 145. Let's see if that will rebound one day or not. So, but the markets which have grown a lot year over year into Africa from Dubai, the number one market for that has been Asmara in Eritrea. When I look at the growth, I look at a decent volume surge year over year, not just on percentage. Asmara grew by 63% in Eritrea, then Mombasa 28%, Dar es Salaam and Addis Ababa by 24% each respectively, and Nouakchott by 26%. Now, when it comes to the performance of our two main African carriers, Ethiopian and Kenya Airways, into Dubai, it's a total different, like two different contrasting styles. Ethiopian Airlines last year, as per data available, carried 729,000 passengers on the Dubai route, which represented a 9% increase over 2023, which was 672,000 passengers. Now, if I just take a normal capacity of Ethiopian flights 3 times a day to Dubai using a 777, obviously they mix and change sometimes, but if I just take a balanced capacity, standard capacity, of a 3 daily 777-300, divide that capacity by the number of seats sold, that will represent a total capacity of 874,000 seats against 729,000 passengers flown. That means Ethiopian last year would have had minimum 83% load factor on their Dubai flights, which is very, very much believable because Sean and I have flown those flights multiple times over the last couple of years. And whenever we have flown in both directions, that flight is 90 to 95% full, even in J-class cabin. Now, obviously, I've taken a 777 capacity as a standard. They sometimes downgrade to 777-200 or even to a 787 or to a 350. But minimum seat factor on that route is 83%. Plus, they have massive amount of cargo in the belly in both directions. Kenya Airways, unfortunately, their passenger numbers dropped on the Dubai route year over year by 3%. They carried 156,000 passengers in 2024 versus 161 in 2023. The reason being is obviously that means they carry about 5 times less passengers, but also because the amount of capacity that they offer. They only offer a daily A330 wet leased aircraft and 4 times a week on a 737-800. Now, but what is common between the two carriers is that both Kenya, actually let's ask John this question. John, what do you think is Kenya Airways and Ethiopian's top market out of Dubai, top transit market? And just to give you a hint, it is the same for both carriers.
Joburg? I don't know.
No, Kinshasa.
Good show on those. Oh, not Kinshasa again. Yeah.
No, last time it was
Kinshasa
Lumbashi
is up
for
there.
Guangzhou.
And what we will see. Yeah, but Kinshasa. Remember, Kinshasa, Dubai was identified by Airbus last year as one of the top unserved routes in Africa. Yes. I'm pretty sure it's going to be identified by Airbus again as one of the top unserved routes in Africa. When Gert presents his when the 2025 version of that, which I had a sneak preview of earlier this week, and now the report is being prettied up for it. But when we see that, I'm fairly certain that that'll be on that list again. So Kinshasa is a underserved market, and I think both ET and KQ are capitalizing on it. So continue with that, Behramjee, because I've got some more observations to make on that when I get a chance to speak.
So, but the top 10 markets Some routes are common between the two carriers, but some are not. The top markets, top 10 for Ethiopian. The number 2 market is also very interesting for Ethiopian Airlines out of Dubai, which is Bamako. Bamako is their second biggest feeder route, followed by Douala, N'Djamena, Lome, Accra, Libreville, Kigali, Yaoundé, and Entebbe. Kenya Airways, on the other hand, their top 10 routes for Dubai feed is Kinshasa, then number 2 is Lagos, then Addis Ababa, then Madagascar, and then Accra, Entebbe, Douala, Kigali, Johannesburg, and this airport, Sean, I don't know what this airport is called, Delta Zebra Alpha.
Saudi,
What is that
Comoros.
city?
Azuli.
Sorry, yeah, it's not Comoros, Mayotte in Indian Ocean, Saudi.
So yeah, so Ethiopian Airlines. Now, one thing which Sean, I bet, will say in the next few minutes is that something will happen to both Ethiopian and Kenya Airways once Emirates starts Kinshasa. Because once Emirates starts Kinshasa, Ethiopian and Kenya Airways will lose a lot of that volume feed on that route. It will be more easier for Ethiopian to recover that volume feed because the point-to-point market in Addis and Dubai is nearly 500,000 passengers now. So they can easily increase their point-to-point market share on that route. Whereas Kenya Airways, Nairobi to Dubai is 1/3 of that amount. So it'll be more of a struggle for Kenya Airways to recover that feed lost to Emirates, but much more easier for Ethiopian though. What else was there? Yes, so for Emirates, out of all of this information that I've just given, that the top markets that Emirates should look into in the future for Africa, we mentioned this in the podcast before, Kinshasa is number 1 by far. Number 2, they should look into Douala, that's nearly 70,000 passengers, and then Bamako, 49. Bamako would have to be tagged with something. Bamako can't survive on its own. Douala also would have to be probably done as a triangle route with either Yaoundé or Libreville. But as we know from one of the Bloomberg press releases, which actually proved to be accurate for their China forecast, Emirates is expected to launch Kinshasa-Brazzaville triangle service later on this year. So, and remember when EC Air flew Brazzaville-Dubai in the mid-2010s, they increased that market demand to 52,000 passengers a year. I think it was in 2014 or 2015. So once Emirates starts Brazzaville, there will be no doubt a massive stimulation effect going on. So yeah, this is the deep dive into Dubai, Africa. The Nigerian market of Dubai still hasn't reached its 2015 peak as yet. And as we stated before on this podcast many times, Emirates 10-15 years ago had the vision to buy and replace the A330-200s with either the A330-300 or the A330-900neo or with the 787-8. They would have been much more powerful and would have a much bigger presence in Africa versus what they have today, because the 777-300ER is far too big for the majority of the African routes.
Thank you. Sean, you want to finish us off for this month?
Okay. I'm going to start by saying that when you're comparing Ethiopian and Kenya Airways from Africa to Dubai, there is no comparison. I mean, Ethiopian is 5 times the size of KQ into Dubai. We're talking 800,000 passengers to 150,000 passengers. And Ethiopian is continuing to grow while KQ is actually shrinking. Ethiopians adding Abu Dhabi, Ethiopians adding Sharjah. They see the UAE as potentially, I won't say an infinite, well, yeah, they see it as a potentially infinite demand market where they can just keep adding capacity and somewhere in Africa is going to backfill that for them. ET's got such a large network in Africa that they can actually consider that a viable strategy. KQ, on the other hand, has condensed their African network into being more of a boutique airline, serving just particular markets which have good city pairs or good demand from that. And consequently, one thing you missed out in your list of what KQ's top markets are from Dubai is you actually missed out Addis Ababa. And KQ's, depending on 2023 or 2024. But I think it's a fascinating thing to look at that there are passengers, that KQ gets the second or third largest amount of their business of passengers who actually fly from Ethiopia via Kenya to Dubai. even though Ethiopian, Emirates, and Fly Dubai, between them, are flying 6 times a day at times. And, I think, and AirAsia, plus. There is there's really no comparison between Ethiopia to UAE and Kenya to UAE. These are very, very different markets in terms of the home markets in that respect. But also something to look at is when you look at comparisons in particular markets. So you can look at, say, Kinshasa to Dubai, whether you could say that there is an equivalence there, a passenger choosing to fly over Ethiopia or choosing to fly over Nairobi, with the exception of South Africa. In almost every other market, Ethiopian is pulling a 10 to 15% higher yield than KQ does. And I think a big chunk of that is because Ethiopian is serving this with wide bodies, are offering more generous baggage allowance. They have the ability to leverage their loyalty program and things, which KQ has struggled on. And I think KQ really needs to improve their image to that sector if they want to be able to compete in these kind of markets. And I know KQ has struggled with hub bypass routes into Mombasa. So, for example, where in the past traffic coming into Mombasa would go via Nairobi and KQ would have that additional domestic leg. People like Fly Dubai is launching Mombasa and growing in that market has hurt KQ in their ability to bring inbound tourists. While that kind of market is not the bread and butter for Ethiopia, while it is fairly significant for the market in Kenya. Beyond that, he's listed all the key ones over there. But what struck me as well when looking at these numbers is the wide variety of destinations that ET is pulling 10,000 plus passengers a year from. I mean, everything from Moroni, Niamey, Tanarivo, Lagos, Wagga, Brazza, Harare. I mean, literally, there is a humongous list of over a dozen points which are pulling 10,000 plus passengers. While in KQ's case, I mean, that's Nairobi, Addis, Mombasa, Kinshasa, and that's it. So the reality is not just an Ethiopian airline, it's Africa's airline. While KQ is Kenya's airline and has a few connections from here and there. And Dubai to Africa, while the demand is there, it is not an easy market to compete in. I mean, look at Uganda Airlines. I mean, we've identified Uganda as the second largest sub-Saharan market after Ethiopia, 256,000. Yet Uganda Airlines is struggling with their Dubai route. They have had to cut one weekly frequency. They're down to now 4 weekly frequencies from 5, simply because when they launched the London route, it just simply didn't make sense to keep flying a fifth Dubai on a different day of the week and making it work that way. So these are not routes which are slam dunk easy wins. There is a discerning customer out there who chooses an airline over another airline, and just looking in terms of the volumes as well as the yields that Ethiopian is able to capture. I mean, Ethiopian's not competing with Emirates, but Ethiopia, for yields at least, but they're winning the volume battle against everybody by a 5-fold margin. But they're also winning the marginal yield battle against their African competitors. And, truly, when you look in terms of what they're looking in terms of Uganda, they're beating Uganda. Ethiopian has better yields one-stop via Addis from Entebbe than Uganda Airlines has non-stop from Entebbe to Dubai. That just tells you that there is something that Ethiopian has got right, which other airlines, no matter what they throw into that market, superior product or whatever, is not translating into superior revenues. And at the end of the day, revenue is the only game in town. So yeah, we will continue to grow strength to strength in the UAE. I think we will see Emirates opening up new routes deeper into Africa this year. We'll probably see, I'd estimate Brazza, Kinshasa, and Douala to all be announced this year, but probably only 1 or 2 of those actually launch. I think some will probably launch next year. I think we will continue to see, especially as Fly Dubai also takes their 787s, more and more flying into secondary African markets, from the UAE. So the sky is really the limit in that market. I think Dubai might as well be a part of Africa for its importance as an African destination as well as an African hub. So yeah. That's what I think.
Yeah, great. Maybe the new tagline for Ethiopian would be the vacuum cleaner of Africa, because they're obviously sucking up, from all around the continent and beyond, right?
But let's underestimate that in due course, Ethiopia's partnership with Etihad, I know we poo-pooed it for the most part because Etihad seems to be making a big announcement of some strategic decision or a new route. to an airport that didn't know they were coming every second week nowadays. But potentially for Ethiopian, that could also be an interesting strategic move depending on how they play it. So I'm not going to predict what Ethiopian does. They've got a lot of good people in that thing. I haven't had a chance to talk to them about the Etihad deal in particular, but I think there's potential to even stimulate that market even more in terms of capacity, potentially to Abu Dhabi and over Dubai. And remember, Abu Dhabi and Sharjah are both opening in the next month, in addition to 3 daily ET flights to Dubai. This is crazy capacity in that market.
Yeah, crazy capacity, but it can handle it. Right, fantastic. Well, we're going to call it a day there for this month. Obviously, this is our last one before we head off to Zanzibar. Oh, go on, Behramjee.
Yes, I just want to stress, Sean mentioned one thing very interesting and important, that Ethiopian yields on Entebbe to Dubai are higher with the one-stop product versus Uganda Airlines, etc. The main reason for that, according to me, is the trust factor. Africans over the last 7 to 8 years have begun to trust Ethiopian Airlines wholeheartedly. Not only with ensuring that their flights are more or less on time, but also that their baggage is delivered without being lost. And thirdly, Ethiopian offers multiple daily frequencies, so if a passenger wants to go at night, in the morning, or in the afternoon, that flexibility is there. And also, having been in Dakar and Douala over the last 6 years now, Ethiopian during the off-season offers 3-piece baggage allowance promo fare to stimulate the Dubai traffic. So that also helps capturing business away from other airlines, because Dubai is a very heavy baggage, with a baggage-heavy route for a lot of Africans. So at the end of the day, their commercial approach to Dubai is bulletproof.
Yeah, good way to sum it up. And I think you made a really good point about the whole trust factor and reliability, and obviously the options. If you do miss a connection, you don't have to wait too long to get another one, etc. So, that is a challenge for all airlines.
I've missed connections to ET600. They've got the 2 flights an hour apart. So I've missed ET600 in the past, and I've just been booked on 612 an hour later. And that's happened to me multiple times. Why would I choose to go somewhere where my next flight's in 3 days when I can just be rebooked in an hour? And, as I said, that's from a business traveler standpoint. But, as a trader, it's a different set of priorities. And I think ET is just, their experience and their capacity is just incomparable. So if you put every other African airline together to Dubai, I think ET will still come out on top. And I think that is the reality. ET is just dominant.
Yeah, and it's something, it's a gold standard for Africa and something for others to strive for and to learn from and, find their niche and find their way to compete or just complement, I suppose. So thank you both for joining us today. As I say, we'll be off to Zanzibar. So the next time that you hear from us, we will be back from there. Not all of us, but Sean and I will be there. So we're looking forward to catching up and getting your feedback on the podcast in person. If you enjoyed the conversation, do share it with somebody in your network you think would benefit from listening. And we'll see you for the next episode soon.
Ethiopian Airlines to Zanzibar, so there you go. Plug for ET on that.
And I tell you what, as a little treat for you all, we'll play out with that song as well. I'll put that in the edit, so you can all have a good listen.
I love that song. I know. It is absolutely on repeat for the last week.
Right, we're going back into the madhouse. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next month for the next one. Thanks, Behramjee. Thanks, Sean. See you soon.
Or see you in 2 weeks in Zanzibar.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right.